Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if this is your first time. This is a book tag and it's an interesting one. It's more about the process and psychology behind your reading rather than specific books, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. And this was a tag that was devised by Ruben at To Readers It May Concern. And I saw a few people do this tag, actually. I think Joe Spivey did it, or Spivey. I can't remember how to pronounce his name, but I think he did it. I saw Steve Donahue do it, and I saw the thing that made me want to do it was watching Hannah at Hannah's Books do it. She did a really interesting one. So shout out to Hannah. Hannah's got a great channel. And it made me think, yeah, that'd be an interesting thing to answer. And there's 8 prompts, there's 8 questions. And as I said, they're not really about books specifically, they're about reading as a preoccupation or an activity, as a recreational thing. Well, actually, not always a recreational thing, but we'll get there in a minute. So the initial tag was called, So You Want to Be a Serious Reader. So it's now called the Read Smart tag. The Read Smart tag fits better with my approach to So You Want to Be a Serious Reader, because I don't know if I want to be a serious reader. Sounds a bit strange, sounds a bit poncy, sounds a bit deliberate, sounds a bit fake, I don't know. Serious reader. Oh, you know, I'm a serious reader. I want to read books, I want to talk about reading on here, and I love people talking about reading on here. I love BookTube, but to claim to be a serious reader sounds a bit, I don't know, it's condescending. It sounds a bit condescending. That's probably the word I'm looking for. Which there's a lot of that on BookTube, and I'm not into that. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at these questions. The first question is, what is your strategy to stay focused and engaged while you read? So this is an interesting one, because I've tried reading while my wife is sitting next to me on her phone doing her Italian lessons or watching TV, and I do get a bit distracted, and I get distracted by sound a lot. I hear stuff all the time. I mean, if I'm in the car and I can only hear a few layers of the song that's being played on the radio when it turned up, so I can hear every layer. I really do react very strongly to audio stimulus or sound or whatever. So I do get more focused if it's quiet, and I probably have a more successful internal dialogue as well, because when you're reading, I think you kind of read it to yourself in many ways. I do find that easier, but I can read with a distraction. But yeah, I can definitely be more focused if it's quiet. Where I am matters as well, because it's not so much the temptation to open up your phone or to watch TV or whatever, but I think my natural happy place is doing lots of things at the same time. I've said before, I did a video a little while ago about the beginning of me investigating ADHD. I think I've got that. And you know, you're seeing now that more and more adults are looking into those kinds of things. And you know, I'm not a young man anymore, but it would be interesting to find out if I have actually got that. And I think I have got that. And part of the thing about that, one of the things that could be part of that, is that I find it that I'm happier if I'm doing 3 or 4 things at the same time. So when I'm usually editing a video, I'm usually watching another video, planning another video, probably reading, and possibly doing something else as well. When I'm alone in the house, say my wife goes away like she has done this weekend, I'm usually doing lots of things at the same time. So because of that, I am more successful at just reading if I have to just read. So I find it really exciting and pleasurable, if you like, if I'm forced into that position. So the most obvious times is if I'm reading in the bath, or reading on a bus, or reading on a train, or reading on a plane. So reading on a journey where that's all I have in front of me is great, because I can get through loads of a book or lots of stories, and I love it. And that's not suggesting that when I'm not doing that, when I'm doing all those things at the same time, I'm not happy. But it is really nice to get really stuck into a book, and that's not as easy for me if there's other things I can do. It's very strange the way my brain works, but it's true. So I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but one of the things I love about bus journeys, train journeys, and I genuinely think, oh great, this thing I'm going to do includes a journey to get there, which means I can do some reading. So it's literally how my brain works, rather than thinking, like for example, if I have a choice of going on a bus somewhere or getting a taxi somewhere, if I get a taxi, I'll get there quickly and I'll do whatever I'm supposed to be doing. If I get a bus, I can get a bit of reading in there as well. But then I could just read at home and then get a taxi, but I know I won't. So it's interesting, that side of it. I also try and read when I first get to work, because there's a good hour and a half before when I'm at work before I have to actually work. So that's sometimes successful, but again, there's lots of things I could be doing or think of starting, so I'm often reading while I'm doing other things if I'm at work. So part of the reason why I thought it'd be interesting to do the tag is that this personality makeup, which is part of this investigation I'm going into about possibly being diagnosed with something, is that I am more successful at being focused if I have to be focused, because I'm nowhere near anything else, which I think is interesting. So that's the first question. A second one, what methods do you use to retain... Sorry. How does your environment influence your focus? So I've kind of talked about that a little bit, but what I will say that my favourite place to read, and I do find myself quite successful at staying put and actually focusing, but I think it's because I just really like that environment, is reading in bed. I love reading in bed. I don't get to read in bed very much because my wife usually gets there first and she's got the TV on, and that's actually not a quiet place to read. But again, if I'm on my own, reading in bed is a really nice thing that I like doing. So yeah, that's definitely accepting all those other things I said. That's my favourite environment to read in. Number 3, what methods do you use to retain and recall information from what you read? When I was a history graduate, when I was a history undergraduate studying history in university, I used to write things down, and that was how I learnt stuff, because I'd write it on paper from the books, and that was somehow helping me to transfer that into my brain to stay there. I don't do it anymore because I'm not studying the books I'm reading. If it stays in, it stays in. Like quite often, academic books, the content of the academic books I read now doesn't stay in, and actually even the fictional stuff doesn't really stay in very well. I'm not as good at retaining information as I used to be, and I don't really want to employ a method to make that happen. I'm just happy to go along with, if I remember everything, that's great. But if I don't, I'll probably enjoy the reread more if I do decide to reread a book, because it will feel fresher. But yeah, I used to be more successful at retaining information, and I used to write notes or write important information down again. But then I had a reason to do that, because I was studying, and the notes would end up in an essay or something. So it is different anyway. But yeah, I don't really use a method now to retain information, and I know that I don't retain all the information that I read. It's definitely true. Number 4, how do you approach difficult or challenging material? How do you approach difficult or challenging material? It depends, actually, because challenging could be that it's just out of your comfort zone. And with that, it depends on how successful that is. Because if it's challenging because I've never read it before, and I'm trying it out, and I'm liking it, then that's all good. If I'm not liking it, I'll keep going as much as I can. And if I feel like this really isn't me, then I'll just stop. Difficult, if it's complex, it depends. If it's non-fiction, I'll keep going and I'll reread it. I'll leave it for a bit, go back to it. I'll look at other things that are related to see if that helps me understand what I was reading. If it's fiction and it's too complex for me to understand, then I'll probably get to the conclusion it's not for me. I can't actually think of an example of fiction that's been too complex for me to understand. So I think it's really non-fiction that I'm responding to here. And as I said, I'll just keep rereading, trying to figure it out, and yeah, try and understand it as any way I can, really. The next one. What role does note taking or annotations play in your reading? It doesn't at all. I never make any notes. Well, I say that I'll make the odd note now and again if I know I'm going to do a video on the book, just a few bullet points. But I don't really take notes. Certainly don't take notes as a habit, and I don't annotate my books. My books have all got no writing in them whatsoever. If there's any writing in it, it's because someone else wrote it and I bought it secondhand. I never write my books. I always want my books to still be in the condition 20 years later that I bought them in. Can't always happen because sometimes they fall out of a box, or they get bent over or whatever, but they'll have got many books that I've had for 30 years that are still in the same condition. So that is what I aim to do. Doesn't always work, but I certainly aim to do that. So I don't write any notes in them or write any annotations in them. Number 6, how do you balance reading for pleasure with reading for personal or professional development? So how do I balance it? For me, the balance is about my own use of time. I've only got so much time. I've only got so many books. I think reading for pleasure is a lot more important to me than reading for academic purposes. I do read for academic purposes, and I do read to learn, but I don't read to learn anywhere near as much as I read for pleasure through choice. I don't want to read for personal or professional development as much as I want to read for pleasure. So the balance is exactly right, but it's probably 10% to 90%. It's probably 90% for pleasure and 10% for personal and professional development. So how do I balance it? I balance it quite instinctively, really. I don't often question it because it seems to be the way I work anyway, so it's fine. Number 7, what is the importance of reading goals? Okay, so reading goals is an interesting one. So I do quite a light reading challenge on Goodreads where I keep the number low so that I maintain a reading habit, but I don't stress about how many books I'm reading. So on average, I probably read between 80 and 100 books a year, but I often set the goal at 70. And actually this year I only set it to 65 because I knew I was going to start writing again. And the goal is deliberately low so that I keep an eye on it because I want to keep reading, and it's so easy for 3 or 4 days to go by and you don't even realise that 3 or 4 days have gone by. And if you haven't been keeping that up and you've not been reading every day, then you're like, oh, I've gone through most of the week and I haven't read much, So I think it's good to have that goal, but it's also good not to have that goal as a problem that is making you stressed. So it's lower than what I generally do. So if I don't meet that challenge, it's because I've allowed myself to forget about reading, which, life throws things at you. Sometimes you're too tired and whatever, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's nice to approach Goodreads like that. So that's that's the goal for the number of books I've read. As far as a goal, reading goals can also be the events you get involved in, because they become goals, because quite often I get involved in events because I want to read something, sometimes something I don't normally read. Like June on the Range was a goal in the sense of discovering Westerns and whether or not I like them. And even when I did Horror Mayhem, I've read a lot of horror over the years, but it was a goal to concentrate on horror in May. When I do, like, if I did Garb August, which I'm likely to do, it's quite a specific and challenging goal to read the books that fall under that remit for a whole month, or to not just dip your toe in, but to read what you can in that month. It's a challenging goal, really, because I'd rather just pick the stuff I want to read. So they are personal goals, but they're goals that are linked to something you want to do rather than something you're just, feeling that you should do or something. They're things I want to do, but they're things that would still be me pushing myself a little bit, because if I just relied on the stuff that I've got naturally on my shelves, then that's not necessarily challenging, and it's not necessarily a goal. So I do think it's different. It does become a goal if you start saying, I'm going to read blah, 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 which is not what you were going to read 2 months before that, you know. So I do think they're goals as well. So the question of what is the importance of goals, I think it's those book events have been good for stretching my reading and going out of my comfort zone and discovering things I didn't discover before. But it's also important to make sure that you don't let that run away with you, and you don't read the stuff you want to read, that your favorite authors and that sort of thing as well. So you've got to balance those things out, I think. Okay, the next question is the last question, actually. What are some strategies for overcoming reading slumps and lack of motivation? All right, so reading slumps, I think you can see them coming. They're often created by reading a book you didn't like. And usually if you're reading a book you don't like, you start really slowing down. You don't want to pick it up. It might be like a week before you've picked it up again. And you're like, and you should be able to notice, wow, I'm not reading this week. And it could be because of the book you're reading. So I think if that's the reason, put that book down and get something else. I don't think you necessarily have to DNF it forever. It might be something you just put down and pick up again later, because it might be that you're just not in the right frame of mind for it, or it's not the right for you at that point, and maybe you will like it later. But reading slumps are usually created by that, I think. So just pick up a book that you really like. And again, you might even get through 3 books before you find the book that you really like, but put them all down and find the one you really like, and then you won't get into that reading slump, because it's always, I think, down to the wrong books at the wrong time. So there we are. That's my response to Reading Smarter, the Smart Read tag, so you want to be a serious reader. So what do you think of those answers? Please let me know below. I approach my reading for fun. I approach it mostly recreationally, as I said. I think it's a great activity. BookTube has made it a public social activity, which is lovely. But I love books and always have done, and love reading. But obviously in my life it competes with all the other things, especially music. But it's a glorious thing, and there's a million, billion, trillion books out there to read. Read the ones you like. Read the ones you're going to like. You know what I mean. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Stay curious.
Paint me a picture